In this lesson I will show you the important subject of seeing the difference between the verb ser and the verb estar. These two verbs in Spanish, they both translate as the verb to be. So, whenever we use the verb to be in English, in Spanish we either use ser or estar. So, when do we use one or the other? Here we will see, we will try to understand when we need to use one, when we need to use the other. First, let's see the conjugation for present tense for ser and estar. So, here to the left we have the verb ser. On the right hand side we have the verb estar. So, I, you, he, she, usted is the formal you, okay? So, usted means you, but formal. However, it conjugates as he or she. And here, ustedes is the formal for you, used in Latin America, while vosotros is the formal, is the plural you. Sorry, I said formal. Vosotros and ustedes are plural you, right? The only difference is that vosotros is plural you used in Spain, ustedes is a plural you used in Latin America. But ustedes conjugates same as ellos, that means they, okay? Now let's begin. Yo soy, I am, or yo estoy, I am. Tú eres, you are. Tú estás, you are. Él or ella or usted es. Él or ella or usted está. Nosotros somos. Nosotros estamos. Vosotros sois. Vosotros estáis. Ustedes son. Ustedes están. Ellos son. Ellos están. Okay? This is a conjugation for present tense. But now, let's see, when do we have to use ser and when estar? The verb ser is used as the verb to be when referring to something more or less permanent or an inherent quality, okay? What does that mean? If I say, my name is Juan, yo soy Juan. Why? Because my name is a permanent quality, right? It does not change. Estar. When do we use the verb estar? Verb to be when referring to a non-permanent or a changeable situation or condition. Or a changeable situation or condition. For example, I am happy, right? Happiness is a state of mind or of spirit that can change anytime. So we use the verb estar. Yo estoy contento or feliz. I am happy. Now let's see some examples here, because it's not so straightforward as it may seem here, but with this it will become easier. Yo soy Juan. This means I am Juan, right? Let's mark green for verb ser and red for the verb estar, okay? Yo soy Juan. I am Juan. The name is something permanent or more or less permanent. So we use the verb ser. Yo soy hombre. Yo soy hombre. I am a man or male, right? Here, as you can see, we do not have an indeterminate article as we have here, because this, without the article, it means manhood in the sense of manhood, okay? So in a more generic way, this can be translated as I am a man or I am a male, right? Here we can say yo soy un hombre. This is more specific. It's I am a man, okay? Since manhood is a more or less permanent state or quality, then we use the verb ser, okay? Carlos es un niño. Carlos es un niño. This means Carlos is a boy or Carlos is a child. The word niño means boy, but it's also used as child. So, although childhood or boyhood is something that does change with time, right? Because a child grows and becomes a man, right? However, it is considered a more or less permanent condition or quality. So we use the verb ser. The verb ser, you see? Now, however, look at this. Carlos está muy niño or está muy infantil, right? Here we are using the word niño in the sense of childish, right? Like infantil. Infantil means childish. So we use this time the verb estar. Verb estar. Why? Because we are referring to a more or less, we are not referring to a more or less permanent situation. We are referring to a changeable situation. This is more a state of mind or spirit or condition. Carlos is childish. He's behaving childishly, okay? Or boyish. That's why this time we are not using ser, but we are using estar. We have another example here. Esto está sucio. I missed the tilde here. This needs a tilde. There. Esto está sucio. This means this is dirty. However, dirty is not a more or less permanent situation. It's a changeable situation. Something is now dirty, but soon after it can be clean, right? So, when something is dirty, we use the verb estar. Okay? Verb estar. Él está feliz. Él está feliz. This means he is happy. And happiness is a state of mind or of spirit, something that can change very often. So this is not referring to a more or less permanent situation or an inherent quality, right? So this uses the verb estar. Verb estar. But look at the last example here. We are saying something very similar, right? We are using the same adjective, feliz, right? Happy. However, here we use the verb ser, conjugated for he. You see? Es. Él, and I missed the tilde here. There. Él es una persona muy feliz. Él es una persona muy feliz. Why then are we using now the verb ser? Here, when we said he is happy, we use the verb estar. And here in the last example we say he is a happy person, and we use the verb ser. In the previous one we use the verb estar, okay? This is because when we say he is a happy person or a very happy person, we are saying that his inherent state is happiness, right? He is a happy person. So this implies a more or less permanent situation or condition. That's why we are using the verb ser, right? The verb ser for something more or less permanent or an inherent quality. In the previous example, él está feliz. He is happy. We are just saying that at that precise moment he is happy. That is a momentary state of spirit, okay? So there we use the verb estar, which refers to a changeable situation, okay? So you can see that in English we always use the verb to be for all these cases, but in Spanish, depending on the situation, we either use ser or estar. So try to remember these rules, and I encourage you to practice a bit more. In this class we will see something different than in the previous lessons. I will show you a list of some of the most frequent false friends in Spanish, right? The title then is Spanish False Cognates or False Friends, right? With English. So the false cognates or false friends are those words that when you read them, they are almost identical to words in English, right? So intuitively people can translate them into the word that they look like that in English, yes, but they mean something different. So they are very confusing. And some of these words, unfortunately, they are very, very used and common in the language, okay? So we will see some of the most used ones, right? Although the list it has hundreds of false friends. So we will begin with the some of the most used false friends. So the word actual, right? The Spanish word actual, that it's identical to the English word actual, right? However, actual means current, right? While the English word actual in Spanish it translates as real, okay? So the English word actual is real in Spanish, and the Spanish word actual in English it means current. Therefore, the word actualmente does not translate to actually, right? Actualmente means currently or at present, while the word actually means realmente in Spanish, okay? These two words are very much confused in when dealing with economic information in the news, okay? So the word for billion and trillion mean totally different things in Spanish and in English. For example, billón or billón in Spanish, un billón means in English 1 trillion, while the word trillón means 1 quintillion, okay? So to give you an idea in zeros, what this means is, billón is this, look at this, we have 12 zeros and then a 1, okay? 12 zeros is billón in Spanish, while in English a billion would have only 9 zeros, okay? The word for trillón in Spanish implies 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is 18. 18 zeros is un trillón in Spanish, while in English 1 trillion would have only 12 zeros, okay? And this is the reason for it. We have the thousands that are 3 zeros, right? The millions are 6 zeros. And now in English 9 zeros is for the billions. However, in Spanish 9 zeros, in Spanish we say 1000 millones, that is 1000 millions. So instead of saying un billón, like as in English, we say 1000 millones, 1000 millions. So what is 1 billion in Spanish? 1 billion in Spanish, or un billón, is 1 million millions, okay? And what is 1 trillion in Spanish? 1 trillion in Spanish is 1 million billions. 1 million Spanish billions, okay? That's why billón and trillón means something so different than billion and trillion in English. Atender. Atender does not mean attend, to attend. Atender means to pay attention, right? The word for to attend, the verb is the verb cuidar, right? And this is another false friend, disgusto. Disgusto. So, disgusto, it looks very similar to disgust, right? But it is not disgust. Disgusto means annoyance, right? When somebody, when for example I have received a very bad news, so I'm disgustado, or I have disgusto, because I received something negative, right? So disgusto is annoyance, but usually in the sense of something emotional, like for example, for example, usually when you receive a bad news, okay, that kind of annoyance, disgusto. While the word for disgust in Spanish would be asco or repugnancia, okay? Repugnancia is repugnance. Asco means the same thing, right? That means disgust. Campo looks like camp, right? But campo means countryside. Somebody goes to the countryside means alguien va al campo. Campo. And the word for camp in Spanish would be campamento, okay? Now these two words, they are identical to other English words that mean something totally different. The word pie, right? It's written the same as the word pie in English. However, the word pie means foot, right? And the Spanish word for pie would be pastel. Pastel is a pie. And the word once. Once is written exactly the same as once, right? But once in Spanish means 11, the number 11. And the word once in Spanish translates as una vez or en cuanto, right? Depending on the situation. It can be una vez, right? For example, if we say, once I have received this, then we would say, en cuanto haya recibido esto, okay? When we mean once in the sense of one time, then it is una vez, okay? Eventualmente does not mean eventually, it means probably. And the word that means eventually in Spanish is finalmente, okay? Or tarde o temprano is another meaning for eventually. This is a very typical false friend. Look, embarazada. Embarazada means pregnant. embarazada, pregnant. And the word for embarrassed in Spanish means avergonzado. Avergonzado. Somebody is embarrassed. Alguien está avergonzado, okay? Or avergonzada if it is female, okay? Remember that in Spanish the adjectives change to masculine or feminine, right? So avergonzado or avergonzada. Same as embarazado if it were a man. However, it's impossible that a man can be pregnant, right? So embarazada is usually or always feminine, okay? Ganga. The word for ganga. Ganga does not mean gang. Ganga means bargain. So when we say that something is a ganga, we are saying that something is a bargain, something is very cheap, okay? And the word gang, the English word gang, means pandilla. Pandilla, right? That is a gang in Spanish. And this is one of the most typical false friends. The word parientes. Parientes. Parientes does not mean parents. Parientes means relatives. Relatives. So, what does the word parents mean? Parents means padres. The word parientes is relatives. So parientes includes all the relatives. It includes the uncles, the aunts, cousins, nephews, right? It includes the grandparents, grandsons, everything, okay? Those are parientes. The English word parents, or parents, it only includes father and mother, right? In Spanish, we call that padres, right? Padres, the plural of the word father. Padres, it also includes the mother, okay? It's the father and the mother. And the last false friend word we will see today is realizar. Realizar. Realizar does not mean realize, okay? Realizar means to carry out something, right? Or to achieve something. So, realizar, we can say I managed to do something. Yo realicé algo, okay? It's a verb. Realizar. And the English word realize, the verb realize, in Spanish it means darse cuenta. So, I have realized this. Yo me di cuenta de esto. Okay? Realize, in Spanish, darse cuenta, is what we call verbo reflexivo. In English it would translate as reflexive verb. But English has nothing like reflexive verbs. That's why I think this expression does not exist in English, reflexive verbs. So it's difficult to explain it in English because the English language has not those type of verbs, okay? But it would be like reflexive verbs are those that you would add the myself, himself. For example, darse cuenta in Spanish is a reflexive verb because it has this suffix that we call the dative personal pronoun, okay? Or sorry, dative possessive pronoun. This would translate as saying, I would realize myself. He would realize himself, right? For example, another reflexive verb in Spanish is the verb to marry, right? To marry means casarse, right? It has the root of the verb casar and then the suffix se, right? That means oneself. So when I say I will marry, yo me voy a casar, it means I will marry myself, right? He will marry means él se va a casar. That means, would translate literally like he will marry himself, right? Or he will marry himself with, and then you say with whom. So that's how the reflexive verbs work in Spanish. So darse cuenta is a reflexive verb. It means to realize. Okay? So this is the end of this lesson about false cognates or false friends of Spanish with English, right? And the next class we will continue seeing some few more, okay? We will continue with the false friends or false cognates. Last class we saw a list with some of the most common false friends, and now we will see some more of the most used Spanish false cognates or false friends with English, okay? All these words are words that are very much used in everyday talk, right? In everyday language. So out of the huge list of some hundred, perhaps, of false cognates or false friends, these are some words that you better learn to identify so you don't confuse these words that are very similar to other English words that mean something different. So let's begin with the first one, sopa. The word sopa is a noun, a feminine noun, la sopa, okay? That means soup, sopa, soup. And don't confuse it with the word for soap, with soap that means jabón in Spanish. So, soap is jabón. And sopa means soup. This is a very frequent false friend that causes confusion. The word suceso, okay? Suceso in Spanish means an event, right? Suceso, event. While the English word success translates in Spanish as éxito, okay? If we want to talk about success, we say éxito. Suceso is an event, okay? Something that may happen. Vaso. Vaso is a drinking glass, okay? We take a drinking glass of water. Un vaso de agua, right? While the word vase, the English word vase means jarrón. Jarrón, okay? A vase where we put some flowers, okay? And un vaso de agua, a glass of water. However, the word vaso, since it has no reference to the material glass, the word vaso can also work for a tumbler, okay? A plastic glass. A plastic, instead of a glass, a plastic tumbler. Sano. The word sano is an adjective. Sano can be sano or sana, depending whether it refers to a man or a woman. And sano means healthy, right? Not the same as the word sane in English, which means cuerdo. Cuerdo. Cuerdo, as sane, is also an adjective, okay? So, cuerdo can be cuerdo for a man or cuerda for a woman. However, don't confuse it with the noun cuerda. The noun cuerda here means a rope, okay? This is another very frequently confused word, the word sensible. Sensible in Spanish means sensitive. Somebody is very sensitive, okay? With his feelings. In Spanish we say, él es muy sensible. While the English word sensible, in Spanish it translates as sensato. So sensible is sensato and sensible is sensitive. The word molestar in Spanish is a soft word. It doesn't have the harsh meaning it has in English. Molestar simply means to bother, right? And it has no negative connotation other than simply the fact of bothering somebody, right? So don't bother with this. No te molestes con esto, okay? So molestar is to bother, while the English word to molest, which has a sexual connotation, in Spanish is abusar sexualmente. Okay? Abusar sexualmente. The word ropa, okay, with the rough R, the Spanish rough R, okay, with your this kind of dental R, the tongue vibrating on the teeth. Ropa means clothes, while the English word rope in Spanish translates as cuerda or soga, right? So cuerda and soga are synonyms in Spanish. They mean rope. And look at this. The word revolver. 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 It means to revolve, right? For example, I will open up my drawer and I will start revolving or among things to find something, right? In Spanish we say revolver. Revolver. Also, revolver can be used when mixing something, right? For example, we are preparing a cake, right? We start mixing the ingredients. In Spanish, that is revolver. However, the English word revolver in Spanish, it translates as revolver. And see at this difference, this minor difference. Revolver is revolver with a tilde. The tilde here on the O. It means that the accent is in this syllable. Revolver. While this word has no tilde, so the accent is in the last syllable, okay? Revolver and revolver, okay? The word largo. Largo means long, while the English word large means grande or amplio, right? Large can mean grande or amplio, depending on the situation. Grande is big, okay? Amplio means large in the sense when more talking of a surface, okay? We can say a large apartment, apartamento amplio, with a huge surface, okay? Or we have a wide look, right? A wide view of something. We also speak of amplio there, right? The word recordar. Recordar is a verb, recordar, but it doesn't mean to record. Recordar means to remember, while the verb to record in Spanish is grabar. Grabar means to record, and recordar means to remember. This verb, the verb enviar, enviar has nothing to do with envy, right? So do not translate enviar as envy. Enviar means to send. For example, I will send a letter to him. Le voy a enviar una carta. Yes? Enviar means to send, or enviar un email, to send an email. The word envy in Spanish is envidia. Envidia. This is another typical false friend in Spanish. Éxito. Éxito. Éxito does not mean exit. It means success. While the Spanish word for exit is salida. So if we are looking for the exit, we are looking for la salida, because salida is a feminine noun. The article is la, the feminine article. And our last false friend for today is destituido. Destituido. Destituido is an adjective, so if it is a man, it ends in O, destituido. If it is a woman, it ends in an A, destituida. So destituido means fired, okay? Somebody has been fired, right? Or removed from a position. Destituido means fired or removed from a position, okay? While the English word destitute, right, it's also an adjective. Somebody is destitute. Destitute in Spanish is indigente. Indigente, somebody that has nothing, right? Indigente. So destituido means not destitute, it means fired. Okay, I wanted to tell you something about the word éxito. See that it has a tilde here, okay? Éxito, if you pronounce the word éxito, you can intuitively realize that it has 3 syllables, okay? Éxito, éxito, yes, éxito, okay? Has 3 syllables, éxito, and the tilde or the accent of the word éxito is in the 3rd syllable starting from the last, okay? So 1, 2, 3, yes? And there is a rule that all the words in Spanish that have the accent, okay, in that syllable, they all carry a tilde, okay? All of them. Let's see if we have one here. No, here we don't have I don't see another word. No. But all the words that have the accent in the 3rd starting from the last, those carry a tilde. And if the word éxito did not carry a tilde, if it didn't, we would read this word éxito. Instead of saying éxito, we would read it éxito. Okay? So, that's part of the beauty of the Spanish language. How the grammatical rules can leave us no doubt whatsoever regarding how to pronounce every single word. So if we know the rules and we come across a new word that we have never heard of or seen, we will have no doubts whatsoever how to pronounce. This will be our last lesson where we will see Spanish false cognates or false friends with English. Okay, this is the 3rd class where we see some false friend words, and today we will finish our topic about false friends, okay? So, false friends are those words between English and Spanish that are almost identical but have different meanings, okay? For example, let's begin with the first word, fútil, right? Fútil is almost identical to the word futile in English. However, the meaning is not identical. There is a difference in meaning between both, right? Although it doesn't mean it doesn't actually differ completely, but it's not exactly the same either. So, fútil means insignificant, right? So, the word fútil in Spanish has that connotation, more referring to something insignificant or unimportant. While the English word futile in Spanish will translate as inútil, okay? And or something useless, okay? The word boda in Spanish, boda, it's a noun, it is a feminine noun. La boda, okay, feminine article. Boda does not mean body, although the words are pretty similar one to each other, right? Boda means wedding, right? La boda is the wedding. The word body in English means cuerpo. Cuerpo. Cuerpo is the body. Now, this is a typical false friend word between English and Spanish. Carpeta. Carpeta does not mean carpet, right? Carpeta means folder. So, carpeta is where we keep our papers. A folder. And the word carpet, the English word carpet, in Spanish is alfombra or tapete. Alfombra or tapete. These two words are synonyms, however there can be a slight difference in meaning between one between one and another one. Alfombra usually is the big carpet you put on the floor, and tapete can be the small one, the rug where you clean your feet before coming in, or can be the one you hang on a wall, okay? But in many countries they have the same meaning exactly, right? Chocar is not to choke. Chocar is to bump, right? So two cars in an accident, they bump one with each other, right? They bump, so chocan. Los autos chocaron, they bumped. Un choque is a bump. So chocar is to bump, while the verb to choke, I wrote this as in Spanish. In English it would be to choke, yeah? To choke. In Spanish, depending on the meaning, depending on the situation, to choke can translate as ahorcar, or can translate as asfixiar, or as atragantarse. Atragantarse has this ending, the dative possessive pronoun, because it is a reflexive verb, okay? So to choke, when we speak of to choke somebody, okay? Somebody's choking another person. There, in Spanish, we use the verb ahorcar. Ahorcar, with an H between A and O. Ahorcar. If we mean to choke somebody that's choking because he has no air, right? He cannot get air in his lungs, okay? For example, through asphyxia. There, to choke translates as asfixiar. Somebody is asfixiándose because he cannot get air. For example, somebody in a crisis of asthma, okay? And the word to choke, when we say to choke, because we are choking because we ate something, we are choking with some food, right? Or with something we ate, okay? There we translate it as atragantarse, okay? Something that got in our larynx, okay? And we are atragantándonos. So to choke can be ahorcar or asfixiar or atragantarse. Now we have the other false friend word, that is cita. Cita. Cita is not a city, right? And it's very similar to the word city, and it's actually identical to the word città in Italian, okay? Only that città would have a tilde. Cita means an appointment or a quote also, okay? So when we have tengo una cita con ella, I have an appointment with her, or a date with her. Cita can also be a date. Tengo una cita con ella, I have a date with her. Or tengo una cita con el médico, I have an appointment with the doctor. But cita can also mean a quote, okay? A quote from a book, a quote from somebody. That is a cita. And the verb to quote somebody is citar. We just add an R. Citar. The word city in Spanish is ciudad. Ciudad means a city. Compromiso. Compromiso does not mean compromise. Compromiso means commitment. Yes? It's a positive word. Commitment. Masculine word. El compromiso. The commitment. While the word a compromise is un acuerdo or arreglo. Okay? Here we have another masculine noun. The word delito. It is el delito, masculine noun. Delito means crime. Does not mean delight. The word for delight is deleite. Deleite is the Spanish meaning of delight. Decepción. Decepción does not mean deception. Decepción means disappointment. Deception actually means engaño in Spanish, right? Engaño is deception. To deceive somebody is engañar. And to disappoint somebody is decepcionar. The word despertar, which is a verb, means to wake up. Okay? Despertar, to wake up, which does not mean desperate. Desperate in Spanish is desesperado. Desesperado means desperate. Despertar means to wake up. This is another typical false friend with Spanish. The word dormitorio. Dormitorio. 4 syllables. Dormitorio means bedroom, right? So we all sleep in our bedroom, en nuestro dormitorio. There is another frequent way of calling bedroom in Spanish, which is cuarto. Cuarto, okay? We also say duermo en mi cuarto. However, cuarto is a generic word. It's not specific. Cuarto means room, right? Can be the bathroom, can be the bedroom, can be the study room, okay? Cuarto. So, although we use many times the word cuarto to designate... Hi there, students. I will dedicate the next lessons to show you how to conjugate all the Spanish regular verbs into all the Spanish conjugation forms, right? We will see 22 conjugation tenses or verbal tenses in Spanish, including the imperative, right? And some of them are very quite infrequent to use in a normal conversation, but nevertheless we will still study them, okay? I will show you how to conjugate all the regular verbs that belong to the group of verbs that end in ar or ar, the groups of verbs that end in er or er, and the groups of verbs that end in ir or ir, right? So Spanish verbs are classified into those 3 big groups, and I will show you the rule for conjugating the verbs in the 3 of those big groups, okay? We will start with the present tense of indicative. Actually, in Spanish we call it presente del modo indicativo, right? That would be simple present. And anyway, I will show you, to begin, I will show you all the different verbal tenses that Spanish language has, right? And in the next lessons we will see each one of these tenses that I will introduce to you right now, right? I will dedicate one lesson for each verbal tense, and that way we will be able to go through all of them, right? So we divide the conjugation tenses in Spanish between modo indicativo and modo subjuntivo, right? In normal conversation, what we use usually is modo indicativo. Let's see which are these, right? So, modo indicativo, we have presente or simple present. We have pretérito indefinido or simple past, right? We have futuro simple or future. We have this other way of saying the future that I will teach you because it's easier for English speakers, right? For example, in English we can say I will go or I am going to go, right? I will eat or I'm going to eat. Okay, this second kind of future conjugation in Spanish is what I will call future two. The imperative form for the affirmative and the imperative form for the negative, right? And why do we have one for the affirmative and one for the negative? Because there are two pronouns, two subject pronouns, you plural and you singular, that differ in their conjugation for the affirmative and for the negative. We will see the pretérito imperfecto, the conditional simple, modo condicional simple, modo condicional perfecto or compuesto, participio presente or gerundio, this is what we call present continuous in English, pretérito perfecto or past perfect, we will learn pretérito pluscuamperfecto or what we call past continuous in English, pretérito anterior, and futuro perfecto, right? This is another kind of future conjugation, and another one that we'll call future continuous, right? And now we will also see the list of conjugations of what we call in Spanish modo subjuntivo, right? We have presente del modo subjuntivo, right? This is another different type of present. It's not present of the modo indicativo, which is the one we always use. It's not I go, you go. That is what we call indicativo. This is modo subjuntivo, and we will learn it in a later on class. Pretérito perfecto o antepresente del modo subjuntivo. Pretérito imperfecto o pretérito del subjuntivo. Pretérito pluscuamperfecto o antepretérito del subjuntivo. Sorry. Let me go back to the presentation. Here we are. Let's see. So, we were in antepretérito del modo subjuntivo, okay? We have futuro simple or futuro del modo subjuntivo and futuro perfecto o antefuturo del modo subjuntivo. So this conjugation that we call modo subjuntivo includes 6 different tenses, and we will leave these for the last, okay? So let's begin with the topic of this, our present lesson. Yes, this we will see the simple present of the modo indicativo. We will learn modo indicativo presente, and we will begin with the verbs that belong to the group of verbs that end in ar or ar, okay? Let's take, for example, the verb hablar. Hablar is an example of a verb that belongs to a group of verbs that end in ar, and it is a regular verb. That's why we'll use this as an example. Hablar means to speak. An example is yo hablo, or I speak in English. So here we have the conjugation of the verb hablar. Yo hablo, I speak. Tú hablas, you speak. Él habla or ella habla, he or she speaks. And we have usted habla. Remember, usted is the formal way of addressing somebody, but it is you. It is a second person of the singular. However, it is the formal you, and it conjugates as if it were the third person of the singular, right? So, tú and usted are both you, but one is informal, the other one is formal. When do we use usted? When we are addressing somebody we are unrelated to, for example, somebody in the street, somebody in a shop, okay, or also somebody that is hierarchically superior to us, like our boss. In the case of a boss that really wants to maintain some distance, so he is required to be addressed in the formal way, right, as usted. Also, when we address elderly people or somebody that is much older than us, as a respectful way, just to show respect, we address them as usted, right? Nosotros hablamos. Nosotros hablamos is we speak. Vosotros habláis. You speak. Ustedes hablan. Also, you speak. And ellos hablan. They speak. Remember that vosotros and ustedes mean the same thing. It is you plural. But vosotros is the word used, or the form used in Spain, and ustedes is a form used in Latin America. Now I'll show you how to conjugate all the verbs, the regular verbs that end in ER into the present. So these are the verbs of the group that end in er. For example, the verb comer, the verb to eat, in tiempo presente, simple present. Example, yo como, or I eat. Yo como is I eat, right? Tú comes, he eats. Él come, ella come, or usted come, if we want to address somebody formally. Nosotros comemos, vosotros coméis, ustedes comen, and ellos comen. Take a look at this. The part I have left, the part of the verb I left in blue is what we call the root of the verb. The root of the verb is what remains once we strip off the ending of the verb. The ending is those last two letters that indicate what group the verb belongs to, right? It can be AR or ER or IR, because all the verbs. So I was telling you that we have the root of the verb in color blue. The root of the verb is what remains of the verb after we have stripped out the ending. The ending are those two last words, those two last letters that can be either AR or ER or IR, because all the Spanish verbs fall into one of those three categories, right? Depending on the ending. So the root of the verb we have in blue, and in red I have written, or I have colored the ending, the typical ending for all regular verbs of this group, right? That is the typical ending for regular verbs for the present tense. So look at that ending, and if you just replace the root of the verb with whatever other verb you want to conjugate, you will have the conjugation in present tense, right? So this is the conjugation for comer, the verb to eat, and this is the typical conjugation for all the regular verbs that end in er. Now I will show you the conjugation for the verbs that end in ir. This is the smallest of the three groups of verbs, right? And this group is the one that has more irregular verbs. Nevertheless, Spanish is a relatively regular language, and the number of irregular verbs is smaller than in English. So, verbs of the group that end in ir, like the verb vivir. Vivir means to live, right? Vivir. See that in blue we have the root of the verb, and in color, in the red color, we have the ending of the verb. This is the group of verbs that end in ir. Example, yo vivo. Yo vivo means I live. So, take a look at the ending, because that is what will, that is the ending you have to add to the root of any verb of the group that ends in ir, right? And there you will have the present tense conjugation for any verb you want to conjugate, right? So let's begin. Yo vivo, for I live. Tú vives, he lives. Él vive or ella vive, or usted vive, for you live, the formal you. Nosotros vivimos, vosotros vivís, ustedes viven, and ellos viven. This is the present tense conjugation. We have seen the present tense for the three big groups of verbs in Spanish. So in our next lesson, I will show you how to conjugate the past tense, right, for the three big groups of verbs. So I hope I see you next class. Goodbye. Hi guys, this is our lesson 131. In this class I will show you how to conjugate the simple past in Spanish, and we will learn how to conjugate it for all the regular verbs that belong to any of the three big groups of verbs in Spanish. We had said that we have three classifications of verbs in Spanish. We have the verbs that end in ar, the verbs that end in er, and the verbs that end in ir, right? AR, ER, and IR. So the ending of the verb in Spanish is what gives us the hint of what group it belongs to, right? So we saw in the last class, when we learned the simple present, I showed you we had 22 conjugation tenses in Spanish, right? So we will see each one of those 22 conjugation tenses. We will dedicate one class for each conjugation tense. So let me review all of them again before we pass to the simple past conjugation. So we have modo indicativo and modo subjuntivo, or the big groups of conjugation tenses in Spanish, right? The most common one is the modo indicativo, where we have the simple present or presente. We have pretérito indefinido, that is a simple past. We also have futuro simple, or the future. We have this other kind of future, this other conjugation of the future that I want to show you because it's more similar to English language. For example, in English we can say I will walk, or we can say I am going to walk. We can say I will speak, or I am going to speak. So this second kind of future tense conjugation is what I will call future 2. We have the imperative in the affirmative, and we have the imperative in the negative. And why do we separate these two? Because the affirmative and the negative, the conjugation changes for two subject pronouns. This is for the you singular and for you plural. The conjugation changes from the imperative affirmative to the imperative negative. So we will see both of them. We will learn the pretérito imperfecto, the modo condicional, simple, or modo condicional perfecto or compuesto. We will learn the participio presente or gerundio, what we call present continuous in English, the pretérito perfecto or past perfect. We will learn the pretérito pluscuamperfecto or past continuous. We will learn pretérito anterior, futuro perfecto, and futuro future continuous, okay? This belongs to the what we call the pretérito, the modo indicativo, and we will also see the modo subjuntivo, right? Which is not so much used, but it's also a conjugation tense we have to learn in Spanish, right? The modo subjuntivo has its present tense, it has its pretérito perfecto o antepresente, its pretérito imperfecto or pretérito del subjuntivo, pretérito pluscuamperfecto or antepretérito del subjuntivo, futuro simple o futuro del subjuntivo, and futuro perfecto o antefuturo del subjuntivo. Okay, enough with that. Let's start conjugating in simple past the group of verbs that end in AR, in ar. For that, we will take as an example the verb hablar. Hablar means to speak. And we will use the verb hablar because it is a perfect example of a regular verb of the first classification in Spanish, right? You can see that in blue is the root of the verb, in red is the ending of the verb, right? The ending shows us that it belongs to the group of verbs that end in ar. Pretérito indefinido is another way of calling the simple past in Spanish. An example is yo hablé, or I spoke. So the ending in red shows us that this is the typical ending for all the regular verbs that belong to the group of verbs that end in AR, right? So if we want to conjugate any verb of this group in past, we need to take the root of the verb and just add this ending that is in red, right? Yo hablé is I spoke. Tú hablaste, you spoke. Él or ella habló. Or usted habló. Remember that usted is the formal you, right? When we address a person we are unrelated to, or when we go shopping, when we talk to somebody in the street, or when we talk to an elder, to show respect, we use the formal you, that is usted, and it conjugates as the third person of the singular. Nosotros hablamos, we spoke. Vosotros hablasteis, you spoke. Ustedes hablaron, and ellos hablaron. Let's see now the conjugation for the groups, for the verbs that end in ER. And we will use as an example the verb comer. Comer means to eat. An example is yo comí. That means I ate. Again, you can see in red the ending that you can add to the root of any verb that you want to conjugate into simple past, right? This ending belongs to the group of verbs that end in ER. So let's begin with yo. I ate is yo comí. Tú comiste. Él or ella comió, or usted comió for the formal you. Nosotros comimos. Vosotros comisteis. Ustedes comieron. Ellos comieron. And now, last we will see the conjugation for the verbs that end in IR or ir. As an example, we will use the verb vivir, which means to live. Vivir. We are conjugating in what we call pretérito indefinido or pasado, which is the simple past. Example, yo viví, I lived. And this is in red, the typical ending for all the regular verbs of the group of verbs that end in IR, ir. Yo viví, tú viviste, él or ella vivió, usted vivió, for the plural you. Sorry, for the formal you. Nosotros vivimos, vosotros vivisteis, ustedes vivieron, ellos vivieron. You can notice how sometimes the Y and the double L, I pronounce it ellos, and sometimes I say ellos or ellos. This depends on the country of the speaker, right? In my country, Uruguay, as well as in Argentina, we pronounce it ellos or ellos, right? While in Spain, and most other Latin American countries, they pronounce it ellos, right? Ellos. It's a minor pronunciation difference. So with this, we have finished the conjugation in simple past of the verbs vivir, comer, and hablar. This is to live, to eat, and to speak. But regardless of what verb we have conjugated, what I want to show you here is how to conjugate all the regular Spanish verbs in Spanish, no matter what group or what classification they belong to. And in our next class, I will show you how to conjugate into the simple future tense. So I'm looking forward to see you then. Goodbye.
Hi there, this is our lesson 133. Here I will show you how to conjugate all the Spanish verbs into what I call future number two. In the previous class, we saw how to conjugate the simple future. The simple future in Spanish is quite more difficult than in English, right? Because there is a particular conjugation for every subject pronoun, right? And we have to learn the rule for conjugating all the regular verbs into each of the three verbal groups. Plus, we need to know how to conjugate the irregular verbs, okay? But this future number two is a much easier future tense conjugation because it is similar to the English future conjugation, okay? Where we have an auxiliary verb that is conjugated and then we leave the verb in infinitive, right? For example, in English we say, I will eat, or we can also say, I am going to eat. We have those two ways of speaking in the future. This future tense that I will show you now corresponds to the second future tense. And in Spanish, it is much more used actually than it is in English. So you can feel really comfortable speaking using this future conjugation in Spanish, and I assure you it will be much easier than learning how to use the simple future that I taught you in the previous lesson. Of course, ideally, you better learn both, but this one will be much easier for you to manage, okay? So before we start learning how to conjugate, let me show you quickly all the conjugations we have in Spanish, all the verbal tenses, right? And we will see all of these in the future lessons, okay? I think I'm missing one because in total I think we have 22 verbal conjugations, and I will show you each one of these, right? For conjugating all the regular verbs of each of the three big groups of verbs, okay? We will begin with the group of verbs that end in ar or in ar, right? And for this, we will take as an example, we will use the verb hablar, which means to speak. This is a perfect example of a regular verb of the first group. You can see in blue we have the root of the verb, right? The root of the verb is what remains once we stripped out the ending of the verb. The ending are those two letters that we have in red, right? Those two letters that designate which group the verb belongs to, right? Here, the last two letters of the verb, ar or ar, show us that this verb belongs to the first group, okay? Hablar. Example, yo voy a hablar. I am going to speak. The auxiliary verb we will use is the verb ir, or verb to go, right? We will start with the first person, the person I. Yo voy a hablar. I am going to speak. Tú vas a hablar. You are going to speak. Él va a hablar. He is going to speak. Ella va a hablar. She is going to speak. Usted va a hablar. You are going to speak. The usted means you, but it is the formal you. Spanish is a very formal language, and we use usted, the formal you, when we are addressing somebody we need to treat with respect. For example, the manager or the CEO or VP of a company or of the place where we work, somebody that requires us to keep some distance, right? So we address him formally, usted. Also, when we address elderly people or much older people than us, right? Unless it is our grandparents or our parents, then we address them as usted. Or also when we address adults that we are not related to, right? For example, if we are talking to somebody in the street or somebody in the market, or we are shopping and we are talking to the salesperson, okay? Or the salesperson is talking to a client or a customer, the correct form in Spanish is to address that person with usted, not with tú, okay? So usted means you formal, but it is conjugated as the third person of the singular, as él or ella. Let's continue. Nosotros vamos a hablar. We are going to speak. Vosotros vais a hablar. You are going to speak. This is the plural you. Ustedes van a hablar. You are going to speak. This is also the plural you. And ellos van a hablar. They are going to speak. Vosotros and ustedes are synonyms, but vosotros is the word that is used in Spain, and ustedes is a subject pronoun that is used in Latin America, right? So, and although they are the same, they mean the same thing, see how the conjugation is different. Vosotros vais a hablar and ustedes van a hablar. Ustedes always conjugates the same as ellos. Let's continue now with the group of verbs that end in ER, right? This is the second group of verbs. Let's use the verb comer as an example. Comer means to eat. Example, yo voy a comer. I am going to eat. We are still using the auxiliary verb ir, or to go. Yo voy a comer. Tú vas a comer. Él va a comer, or ella va a comer, or usted va a comer. You are going to eat. Nosotros vamos a comer. Vosotros vais a comer. Ustedes van a comer. Ellos van a comer. Let's end with the third and last group of verbs, the verbs that end in ir, right, or ir. This is the smallest of the three groups of verbs, and this is also the group of verbs that has more irregular verbs. As an example, let's take the verb vivir and let's conjugate this verb. Vivir means to live. Example, yo voy a vivir. I am going to live. And we are still using the auxiliary verb ir, to go, okay? See how ir has the root of the verb, actually not the root, the ending is ir. The whole verb itself is just ir, those two letters, right? That shows us that this verb belongs to this third group of verbs. However, since this verb has no root because it just has two letters, right? The conjugation of the verb is completely irregular and it has nothing of the two words that it shows in the infinitive, right? IR. You can see that the conjugation has no I and has no R. Look, yo voy. Voy has no I and has no R. This is a very irregular verb. Let's begin conjugating the verb vivir. Yo voy a vivir. Tú vas a vivir. Él va a vivir. Nosotros vamos a vivir. Vosotros vais a vivir. Ustedes van a vivir. Ellos van a vivir. So we have seen how to conjugate this, what I call future number 2, Hi there. This is our lesson 134, and in this lesson I will show you how to conjugate the present continuous in Spanish. Present continuous in Spanish is called participio presente or gerundio, right? Actually, the word gerundio means the conjugation of the verb with the ending. Actually, as you can see, the ending in English is ing, right? For example, going, eating, right? In Spanish, the ending can be ando for the group of verbs that end in ar, or endo for the other verbs, okay? So we will see that. I'll show you briefly all the verbs that we will learn how to conjugate in Spanish, okay? I was missing one there. In total, we will learn how to conjugate 22 verbs. I will show you how to conjugate all the regular verbs of the three different groups of verbs in Spanish into these 22 different verbal tenses. So let's begin conjugating present continuous with the verbs that end in AR. This is the first group of verbs, the first and the biggest of the three groups. And this group also is the one that has less irregular verbs, okay? So it has very few irregular verbs, while the third group is the one that has more irregular verbs. As an example, let's take the verb hablar. It's a perfect example of a verb of this group. Hablar means to speak. Example, yo estoy hablando. I am speaking. Okay? Estoy is the verb estar, conjugation of the verb estar. And literally it means am, right? I am speaking. You can see that the ending ando corresponds to the ending ing from speaking, okay? The first four letters of the verb hablar correspond to the root. The root of the verb is what remains once we have stripped out the last two letters that indicate the group the verb belongs to. We will be using the auxiliary verb estar that corresponds to the verb to be in English, right? Let's begin with the first person of the singular. Yo estoy hablando. I am speaking. Tú estás hablando. You are speaking. Él está hablando. He is speaking. Ella está hablando. She is speaking. Usted está hablando. You are speaking. Remember, usted is the formal you. So we use usted when we address somebody that is much older than us or somebody we are not acquainted with. For example, if we go shopping or if we are talking to a customer or a client or to somebody in the street, right? Or if we are talking to a manager or a CEO and somebody that requires that we maintain some respectful distance, okay? Nosotros estamos hablando. Vosotros estáis hablando. Ustedes están hablando. Ellos están hablando. Vosotros and ustedes are synonyms, but remember, vosotros is used in Spain, ustedes is used in Latin America. And see how the conjugation of each one is different, right? Let's continue conjugating the second group of verbs, the verbs that end in ER. We'll use as an example the verb comer, that means to eat. Comer, you can see if we strip out the ending, the root of the verb is com. So we will take the root of the verb and we will just add the proper ending for this verbal conjugation. Example, yo estoy comiendo. I am eating. And we are still using the auxiliary verb estar, as in English we use the verb to be. Yo estoy comiendo. Tú estás comiendo. Él está comiendo. Nosotros estamos comiendo. Vosotros estáis comiendo. Ustedes están comiendo. Ellos están comiendo. Now let's end with the third and last group of verbs, the verbs that end in IR or ir. And we will use the verb vivir as an example of a regular verb of this group. Vivir means to live. Example, yo estoy viviendo. I am living. We are still using auxiliary verb estar. Yo estoy viviendo. Tú estás viviendo. Él está viviendo. Nosotros estamos viviendo. Vosotros estáis viviendo. Ustedes están viviendo. Ellos están viviendo. See how in English, while in English we have the ending ing for the present continuous, in Spanish, since we have three groups of verbs, we have more than one ending. The first group has the ending ando, right? Like caminando, hablando. And the second and third group of verbs have the ending yendo, as you can see here, viviendo, comiendo. Okay? So remember the two different endings for the present continuous in Spanish. And this is the end of our lesson about present continuous or participio presente or gerundio. And stay posted, keep posted, because I will be uploading more lessons so I can introduce to you all the different verbal conjugations in Spanish. So I will continue with the imperative, and we will end with all the different verbal tenses, like conditional, like subjunctive, and the many different verbal tenses. Hi there, this is our lesson 135. Here I will teach you what we call Pretérito imperfecto del indicativo in Spanish. This verbal tense belongs to the past. In Spanish, there are several different verbal tenses that refer to the past. This is one of them, and this is one of the most used past tenses in Spanish. Pretérito imperfecto del indicativo. Before we step into the topic, let me show you briefly the different conjugations we have in Spanish, and we will actually dedicate one lesson to each one of these, and still there is one missing here, I guess. So pretérito imperfecto is this lesson, and we'll have more lessons seeing the different verbal conjugations. The list we just saw is for the modo indicativo, and we also have modo subjuntivo, which is a less used verbal conjugation, which is divided into 6 different tenses, right? And in due time we will see all these verbal conjugations, right, for the 3 groups of verbs. Now let's step into our topic, pretérito imperfecto del indicativo. We will begin with a group of verbs that end in ar or ar, okay? And as an example of a verb of this first group, we will take the verb hablar. Hablar means to speak, right? This is a perfect example of a regular verb, so we will conjugate the verb hablar. This is an example of this pretérito imperfecto, right? Yo hablaba. It means I used to speak, right? Or I spoke. But yo hablaba, this conjugation is used to express something that we used to do in the past, okay? So it's like saying in English, I used to, and whatever verb we want to say, okay? Let's begin with the first person. Remember that usted means you, the formal you, okay? Spanish is a formal language and it uses this formal way for addressing somebody a lot, right? So when we address somebody that is much older than us, or a manager or a CEO or somebody that requires us to keep a respectful distance, or somebody we are not acquainted with. For example, we talk to somebody in the street, or when we go shopping, or a customer or a client, okay? There we address the person as usted. So usted and you are synonyms, but usted is formal and tú is informal. However, usted conjugates as él and ella. It conjugates as he or she, okay? As for vosotros and ustedes, they both mean you plural, but vosotros is the pronoun that is used in Spain, and ustedes is a subject pronoun that is used in Latin America, okay? Let's begin. Yo hablaba. Tú hablabas. Él hablaba, or ella hablaba, or usted hablaba. Nosotros hablábamos. Vosotros hablabais. Ustedes hablaban. Ellos hablaban. See how we have I have colored the verb with blue and with red. What is colored in blue in the verb, that is the root of the verb, okay? You can see that regular verbs, the root remains unchanged in all the verbal tenses. You just change the ending of the verb, right, for every pronoun and for every different conjugation, right? So the ending of the verb in infinitive is what determines whether the verb belongs to the first group or the second group or the third group. This one ends in AR, so it belongs to the first group. This is the biggest of the three groups and the one that has less irregular verbs. Let's continue with the second group of verbs, the verbs that end in ER. As an example, we will use the verb comer. Comer means to eat, and it is a regular verb of the second group. Example, yo comía. I ate, or I used to eat. So if I want to say in the past I used to eat more, okay? I would say antes yo comía más, right? Or in the past I ate more. We will say antes yo comía más, okay? So this verbal conjugation is used when we want to indicate something that we used to do in the past, or something from the past but that has changed, okay? So yo comía. Let's begin. Yo comía, tú comías, él comía, nosotros comíamos, vosotros comíais, ustedes comían, ellos comían. See how vosotros and ustedes, although they are synonyms, their conjugation is different. And the conjugation for ustedes is always the same conjugation as for ellos, for they, right? Although they mean different things. So let's end with the third and last group of verbs in Spanish. This is the smallest of the three groups of verbs, right? The verbs that end in ir. And this group of verbs, this third group, is also the one that has more irregular verbs. Let's take, for example, this verb vivir, that means to live. This is a regular verb of the third group, vivir. Example, yo vivía, I used to live. Okay, for example, if I want to say, before I used to live in Spain, right? Or before I lived in Spain. Since I'm referring to something that from the past, but that is not any longer, I use the pretérito imperfecto in Spanish. I will say yo vivía, right? If now I live in Portugal and last year I lived in Spain, then in Spanish I will say yo vivía en España, right? Let's begin. Yo vivía. Tú vivías. Él vivía. Or ella vivía. Or usted vivía. Nosotros vivíamos. Vosotros vivíais. Ustedes vivían. Ellos vivían. So this is the third group of verbs of Spanish, right? So here you have seen what we call pretérito imperfecto del indicativo. There are three more used past tenses in Spanish. The first one is simple past, the second one is pretérito imperfecto that we have seen now, and the third one that we will see in the next lesson is what we call in English the present perfect, right? I have done. Yo he hecho, okay? And we will see that in our next class. So I'll be hoping to see you there soon. Goodbye. Hi there. This is our lesson 136. And in this class I will show you the modo imperativo afirmativo. That is the imperative tense in the affirmative. Why? Because in Spanish there are some differences between the imperative in the affirmative and the imperative in the negative, right? Mainly for the second person of the singular and the second person of the plural. That is for you singular and you plural. In the imperative, the conjugation changes for the affirmative and the negative in these two subject pronouns. So we will divide the conjugation first for the imperative affirmative, and in the next lesson I will show you the imperative in the negative. So before we begin, let me show you again which are the verbal tenses that we will learn in this set of 22 PowerPoint video lessons that I have prepared. You can see these we have already done. So in the next lessons we will see all these, right? And this page is actually what we call the modo indicativo, right? It is the most fundamental group of conjugation tenses, okay, in Spanish. And this one is a bit more rare, but it's also important that you learn it. We call it the modo subjuntivo or tiempos de subjuntivo, right? And this is formed by 6 more conjugation tenses, okay? So we will see all these in due time, right? Now let's get into our topic, the imperative, the affirmative, okay? And we will begin with the first group of verbs, that is the verbs that end with the letters AR, right? This is the bigger group of verbs, right? And it is the group that has less irregulars. So let's begin we'll take as an example of a regular verb of this first group, the verb hablar, which is to speak. Example, habla, or speak. You can see here that we are omitting the subject pronoun, right? We can say habla tú, right? However, in Spanish, we can always omit the subject pronoun because the conjugation of the verb always gives us a hint regarding who is the subject of the sentence, right? So it's always correct to, grammatically correct to say a verb without providing the subject or the subject pronoun, right? Maybe there is information missing, but grammatically it's correct. So let's begin. Remember, in the imperative, we never begin with the first person of the singular, with the pronoun I, right? Because that makes no sense to give a command to oneself. So we always begin in the imperative with the you, with the second person of the singular. So let's see. Habla tú, for you speak. Hable él, or hable ella, or hable usted. Hablemos nosotros, we speak. Hablad vosotros, you speak, you plural. Hablen ustedes, also you speak, and hablen ellos, they speak. In English, when we say the imperative, right, when we speak in the imperative, we use the verb in the infinitive, right? Speak, right? Walk. However, in Spanish, there is a unique conjugation for the imperative, so it is very recognizable when we read or listen to a verb that is conjugated in the imperative, right? Also, take a look at the second case, hable él or ella or usted. Usted means the same as you, as tú, but usted is the formal you. So, while usted is a formal you, it conjugates as he or as she. That's why we have written it in the same line as él or as ella. And in the case of vosotros and ustedes are synonyms, but they conjugate differently, right? Vosotros is spoken in Spain, ustedes is spoken in Latin America. So let's continue with the second group of verbs, right? The verbs that end in er or er. Example, verb comer. Comer is to eat, and this is a regular verb of the second group. Example, come, eat. Come tú, you eat. Coma él, or coma ella, or coma usted, giving a command. Comamos nosotros, we eat, or let's eat. Comed vosotros, you eat, you plural. Coman ustedes, also you eat. And coman ellos, they eat. Okay? So, see how the root of the verb remains the same, unchanged, right? The root of the verb is what remains once we strip out the ending from the infinitive, right? So, the infinitive is comer. The last two letters are the ones that determine what group the verb belongs to. So we remove those two letters, and what remains is the root of the verb, okay? In red, we can see the ending that is appropriate for each of those subject pronouns for the imperative affirmative. Now we will end our lesson with the third and last group of Spanish verbs, the group of verbs that end in ir. This third group is the smallest of the three groups, and it's also the one that has more irregular verbs. Example of a regular verb of the third group, the verb vivir. Vivir means to live. Example, vive or live. Vive tú. Viva él or viva ella or viva usted. Vivamos nosotros. Vivid vosotros. Vivan ustedes. And vivan ellos. Let's read this again, one more time. Vive tú, you live. Viva él, he live. Or viva usted, you live, you plural. Vivamos nosotros, let's live. Vivid vosotros, you live. Vivan ustedes, you live. And vivan ellos, they live, in the imperative affirmative. So this is the end of our lesson 136, and I will show you how to conjugate the imperative in the negative in our next lesson. So I expect to see you there, and you will see how the first one here and the fourth will be changing for the negative. That is tú and vosotros. Hi, in our lesson 137 I will show you the modo imperativo negativo. That is the imperative in the negative form, right? In the previous class I showed you the imperative in the affirmative, but in Spanish there is a slight difference between the imperative in the affirmative and the imperative in the negative. And I say a slight difference because it only changes for two subject pronouns, right? For you singular and for you plural. So because of that, it deserves to be studied apart. So before we begin, let's review quickly all the different tenses that we'll be seeing in this set of PowerPoint video lessons. We've already seen the present, the past, the simple future, imperative affirmative, and some other few, but we still have a few to go through, okay? We will also learn the modo subjuntivo or tiempos del subjuntivo, right? And I'll show you how and when it is used. But now let's begin conjugating in the imperative negative. As usual, I will begin with the first group of verbs, the verbs that end in AR, right? Let's begin as usual with the verb hablar, to speak. See how the last two letters are the ending of the verb, and they are the ones that indicate what group this verb belongs to, and what remains after we remove these last two letters, what remains is the root of the verb. This is what we call the root of the verb. It's what is in color blue, okay? So see how the root of the verb always remains unchanged in all the conjugations for all the regular verbs in Spanish, right? Example, no hables, don't speak. So we'll begin with the subject pronoun you or tú, because we do not begin with I when we conjugate in the imperative. So, no hables tú, no hable él, or no hable ella, or no hable usted, no hablemos nosotros, no habléis vosotros, no hablen ustedes, no hablen ellos. See how there are two subject pronouns that have changed in the conjugation for the imperative in the negative. It's the first one, no hables tú. Remember that in the affirmative, the conjugation for the imperative is habla tú. So here we changed from habla with an A to no hables, right? So from an A we changed to an E and an S. And vosotros is the other one that also changes. Remember that in the affirmative we would say hablad vosotros, hablad vosotros. And in the negative we say no habléis vosotros, right? So these two are going to change in the three groups of verbs, right? But the ending will be different for the other groups. So remember, no hables tú, you do not speak. No hable él, he not speak, or he don't speak. No hablemos nosotros, we don't speak. Okay, let's jump to the second group of verbs in the imperative negative, the verbs that end in ER, right? Verb comer will be our example for this group of verbs. This is a regular verb. Comer means to eat. Example, no comas, don't eat. No comas, don't eat. So, no comas tú means you don't eat. No coma él, or no coma ella, or no coma usted, right? For he or for she, or for you in the formal way, okay? This is the formal pronoun for you. No comamos nosotros. No comáis vosotros. No coman ustedes. And no coman ellos. See how it changes compared with the first group of verbs, right? Remember, we would say no habléis, we would say no hables tú, right? We would add an E and an S. And here we add an A and an S, right? And so the difference between the conjugation of the first group, the ones that end in ar, and this one, you can see that wherever we have an A in this one, for the imperative negative, in the previous group we had an E, right? And again, you can see if we compare with the imperative in the affirmative, how here we say no comas tú, while in the affirmative we would say come tú. And for vosotros we say no comáis vosotros. And for the affirmative we would say comed vosotros. Let's jump now to the third and last group of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end in ir or ir. And we will take as an example the regular verb vivir, or to live. Example, no vivas, don't live. No vivas tú, do not live, you do not live. No viva él, or no viva ella, or no viva usted. No vivamos nosotros. No viváis vosotros. No vivan ustedes. And no vivan ellos. Note how Ustedes and ellos always conjugates the same for any verb and for any verbal conjugation in Spanish, right? Also, note how in the imperative, the ending that we add to the root of the verb, so I'm talking of the ending that is in color red, is the same between the second and the third groups of verbs, right? The ones that end in er and the ones that end in ir. The only one that is different is the first group of verbs, the one that ends in ar, okay? The first one that we saw. So again, see that we say no vivas tú, you do not live, while in the affirmative we would say vive tú. We would say vive or vive. And for vosotros, here we say no viváis vosotros in the negative. And in the affirmative we would say vivid vosotros. So you can see how there is a difference between the imperative in the negative and the imperative in the affirmative, right? And therefore there are two separate conjugations of the imperative, one for the negative and one for the affirmative.